I had just started teaching some pupils some yoga when I suddenly passed out in the middle of my class. I fell dead, went kaput. Exactly in such a manner. My heart stopped beating suddenly, like if someone had turned off a switch. I experienced a sudden cardiac arrest when I was 29 years old. My family has no history of cardiac problems, and there were no warning signs or indications that anything was wrong. A student performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation on me for the 20 minutes it took for the ambulance to arrive. After some time had passed, I was informed that the emergency medical professionals had brought me back to life by injecting adrenaline into my knee. I began having seizures on the way to the hospital, where they transported me as quickly as they could. As soon as I got to the hospital, I was put into a coma by the medical staff so that they could examine my brain while they waited to make a diagnosis. No one at the moment knew for sure whether or not I would wake up, let alone who I would be if I did. For me, or at least for whatever spirit or essence that exists inside me, my experience of the scenario was very different from what other people had reported having. It felt as if I had suddenly sprung from the confines of time and existed outside of them. There was no progression in a straight line. There was no moving from one place to another. Instead, time became a mess of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey nonsense, as the expression goes. I had no recollection of how I had gotten there, but I was now making my way through a spooky and enchanted forest. It was an old-growth forest with trees that were so tall and slender that the sparse canopies of the trees looked to go all the way up to the skies. At least it was outside the scope of my conscious awareness to perceive it. Their trunks were thin, smooth, and light. They provided a welcome burst of cool air. Their leaves were still green, but you could see a tinge of autumn coloration in them. There were enormous birch trees, but the forest they were in was one that I had never been to or seen in real life before. It was a world that was unrecognizable in every way. Despite the fact that it was quite probably the furthest I've ever traveled, I don't really have any method of determining how far it was. The entire incident took place at that point in the afternoon, which was quite near to sunset. It wasn't exactly golden, but it was the hue that you get as the sun is ready to set and the light is beginning to fade. The hues seemed to come from another universe, casting a warm golden light over everything. The light appeared to be emanating from every direction, but I was unable to identify a single point of origin for it. Because the leaves were so high over my head, I couldn't possibly tell you what colors they were. It appeared as though the forest continued to grow higher and higher into the sky. The thing that struck me the most, though, was how quiet it was. The forest was completely silent, and it was completely unlike from any other forest I had ever visited while awake. Typically, woods are almost as noisy as cities due to the presence of singing birds and insects, burrowing animals, the rustling of the wind through the leaves, the crunching of leaves underfoot, and the rushing of water in streams that are close. On the other hand, the stillness in this place was not at all oppressive. It was freeing in a certain sense. The surface of the ground was covered with a plush bed of leaves, the hue of which was somewhere between green and goldish red. It seemed as though I had entered the fall of my life. The stillness of my own thoughts, on the other hand, was the one that took me by surprise the most. My mind is normally restless. It is racing around in a flurry of ideas that are always competing with each other for my attention. This state of mind makes me uneasy. In my waking world, I have many layers of thinking, such as a music that is playing nonstop in my brain on one layer, a daydream of the future on another layer, and a reality of the present that is pushing my attention to the forefront of my mind on the third layer. But in this place, all of my thoughts evaporated into the absolute silence that surrounded me. It was just like a calm body of water with no waves. Total calm, total oneness, total peace. I did not have a single worry or concern in the world. I had merged into oneness with the universe. I was not distracted by any ideas, and I was not concerned about where I was going. I was simply going about my business, unaffected by anything around me as I walked along the trail. As I strolled down the trail behind myself, hardly a sound was created by my footsteps. My body was in front of me, and I was my soul, which was floating behind it. Together with my body, I was holding hands with an androgynous being that had a silvery appearance. The being had a languid and sinuous appearance, was very tall, silver, dressed in white, and had silver hair that reached shoulder length. The being was stunning, yet in some inexplicable way, it lacked both a face and a sexuality. It took my hand and led me in the right direction along the trail. I had never seen this person before, yet they seemed to be acting as a type of spiritual guide for me. Even though I couldn't make out any wings, perhaps it was an angel. The trail veered off to the right and disappeared into the forest ahead of us. I had an uncanny feeling that if I continued around that bend in the trail, I would no longer exist. If I were to move on, it would be the end of my physical existence, not that I could recall what it was like to have a physical life in this location. I was prepared to go on. I liked the feeling, and I didn't want to leave those woods even though I was enjoying it. This location was just perfect for me in every way. After all, going for a stroll in the forest is one of my all-time favorite ways to spend time outside. I was completely oblivious to the destination of the road. I am just sure of the fact that I did not want to leave the woods because I felt so at ease, so content, and so immersed in the warmth of the universe. Suddenly, my spirit self felt a jolt behind my navel. I felt a pull, almost like a cartoon hook was wrapping itself around my middle. It seemed like someone was physically pulling at my belly button, and it jerked me away from the bend in the woods. My progressive progress came to a standstill, and I was unable to continue moving forward. I was unable to take another step in the direction of the bend in the woods due to my physical condition. As I redirected my attention away from the curve formed by the trees, I had the thought, I have to leave. And there was the moment that I came to. I was lying in a bed at the hospital. The truth of the suffering and bafflement that I am experiencing is gradually coming into focus all around me. The realization that my Aunt Karen was present was disorienting enough for me to snap out of my daze and into full consciousness. Despite the fact that I was in Texas, she resided in Tennessee. It seemed to me at the time that I was either hallucinating or dreaming. It was impossible for her to be here. However, she was there. She had flown in to provide assistance to my mother as they worked to remove the tubes that had kept me intubated for many days. The following few days passed in a blur of agony, drugs, discomfort, and difficulty swallowing. After some time had passed, I was given more information about the situation. My fiancé, who is now my husband, stayed by my side during the 4 days that I was in a coma, clutching my hand and pleading with me not to leave him. My father asked my mother to pray beside him. I was certain that the only thing that had brought me down from that level and brought me back to earth was hearing their voices. Because that's how it appeared to be. I was abruptly yanked away from the oneness and thrust into the agony and muddle that comes with existence. I was admitted to the hospital for a total of 2 weeks, where I underwent treatment after operation while the medical staff attempted to comprehend and identify what had occurred to me. They had no idea what to do. There were no abnormalities, no blockages, and no structural damage of any type seen in my heart. They claimed that the only thing wrong with me was the fact that I had passed away, but other than that, there was nothing else wrong with me at all. They decided that it was probably long QT, which is an asymptomatic inherited cardiac syndrome that is caused by the perfect storm scenario. The only thing they could observe was a small magnesium and potassium deficit, and based on that, they came to that conclusion. After having a defibrillator put in me, I was released from the hospital the next day. Now, after almost 2 years, my device has never gone off, and I haven't had any cardiac problems since it was implanted.